Hello, my name is Brendan Alvey, and I'm a PhD student at the University of Missouri, and I work under Dr. Anderson in the Mindful Lab. So today I'm going to be going over how to do a pretty simple data collection using Unreal Engine 4 and the Movie Render plugin that's included in it. So this is going to be using basically all native tools, and really the motivation behind this is, going out and collecting data in the real world and labeling it automatically is kind of hard, and some of the data like depth, especially at range, stuff like that, like surface normals, excuse me, things like that are pretty difficult to get real ground truth of. But with simulation, you can get sort of abundant labeled data that way. So this is really hoping to enable machine learning, computer vision, robotics, and really any project that can maybe make use of this simulated imagery. The goal is just to really set this up quickly. So the first thing you're going to need is the Epic Games launcher. This is the same launcher that's used to play video games. It's they're published by Epic. It's just like Fortnite. So if you already have it installed, you can just pull it up. Once you have it pulled up, you may have it hidden in the settings or something, but if you don't, there should be an Unreal Engine tab, and then if you click on the Library tab here, it'll bring up the engine versions. You can click plus and select whichever version you want. I'm going to be working out of 4.26.2, but other versions should work. They might look a little different with the Render Q plugin. I think they've made some changes to it sort of recently. So we're just going to click Launch. Okay, and then it's going to ask you to create a new project. We're going to click Games, Next, and then leave it on blank here because we're actually going to load up some other content. You can click Next, and then really the only thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to enable ray tracing just because we want that extra reflections and nice looking shadows there. So I'm going to click Create Project, and it's going to launch our new project here. And when it loads in, it's probably just going to load in, yep, in our default sort of map here of these chairs and table. And we can just dismiss this. And so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to load in a map with some more interesting content than just some chairs. So if we go back into the launcher here, we can click on Marketplace. The Marketplace is loaded. We can pull up some content. They got all kinds of good stuff in here. I'm going to use the Barnyard Megascan Megapack here. And since I've already got it downloaded, I can just add it to my project. This is a pretty good little photorealistic pack of an agricultural kind of farm scene, which is nice because we're going to kind of do like basically a simulated data collection over a field here. So like a simulated, you might want to do it for like a crop study or something like that. Okay, just takes a second here to verify the installation. You'll see down here the folder has already been created in our content folder. All right, so now I should be able to open it up. We can go to File, Open Level, and then most contents like this, if you're in your content folder, it should be in there, and there should be a Maps folder. I'm just going to load basically this barn map. This is basically the one overview map, or one big map for this content pack. Okay, so we're in here, and it's all loaded in. Great. So I'm gonna go kind of fly up here and look around at something and decide. Let's see, let's collect maybe a little square patch. Maybe do like a little bit of a lawnmower pattern over this corn here. Okay. So the first thing I might do here is place some sort of markers here, maybe some like scene markers for the corners. So I'm gonna take these just this cylinder here. I'm gonna make it maybe uh, a little skinnier, and then maybe a little bit taller, maybe a little taller than that. Okay. Oh, that's way too tall. Let's go down to 3. Okay. All right, I'm just going to put these on the corners of our sort of collection area here, maybe. It's just sort of a fictional collection area. So I'm just gonna copy them, put another one maybe over here. Actually, maybe I'll make our little area smaller. We'll just do like a little patch here. Let's do maybe here, go up here, and then maybe another little patch here. We're just gonna study this little area, okay? You can imagine how you would obviously expand this to a bigger area. So I'm just gonna put these little markers, and then I'm gonna select. I'm gonna go to Edit, and then Project Settings, and then type in Stencil here, or Custom Depth Stencil Pass, I guess, and change Enabled to Enabled with Stencil. That's gonna let us set Stencil ID values. So here I'm gonna select all of my cylinders here, and I'm gonna search for. If I search for Custom here, it pulls up these guys. They're in the Rendering tab. You can see I can enable the Rendering Custom Depth Pass, and then I'm going to give them a value. So I'm just going to enter some value. I'll just say 103, and then now they have sort of a value that says. So that'll help us when we do automatic labeling later. Okay, now we're ready to put in a camera. Let's go ahead and get a cinematic camera. So type in Cine, and just drag it right on into our scene. You can see we get a little preview window. Here, let me get it kind of up here. And I'm going to point it actually kind of nadir. Maybe not quite nadir. Oh, we can go nadir, yeah. And let's sort of start it out on the corner here, looking at our first object maybe. Let's see what this looks like from above maybe. Yeah, okay, good. All right, so we've got our camera kind of maybe where we want it. Let's say we want it at, oh, I don't know, maybe 20 meters up or something like that. So right now it's kind of hard to tell how high it is because we've got the Z value of it, but the ground kind of varies and stuff. We might be able to look at place a little target object, but one thing you can do is you can say, okay, what if I go to the perspective, change my perspective to say like the left, and then if I click on my camera here, I can zoom out, and I can take my middle mouse and I can actually drag it down here, and this is going to be in, I think, centimeters. So if we go down here, this is going to be, this will be, let's see, so 10, so here would be 10 meters. So maybe we want to do about a 10 meter collect. We're about, 70 or so above that, maybe a little more. Let's see, maybe 100. So we're about a meter too high. So let's see if we go into our camera here, and we can change this 4 to a 3, and there now we should be right at about 10 meters up or so. Yep. Okay, so we can go back into our camera. Let's go back into perspective here so we can see everything. So we've got our camera set 10 meters up where we want it. Now the next thing we want to do is maybe set some of our camera settings. So the camera there's all sorts of camera settings here. You can change like the film type. We can leave it on just a digital film if we want. We can go down and change the focal length, the aperture, focus settings, all sorts of stuff. You can also, if you don't want it to be rendered with the shadow or anything like that, you can change whether or not the mesh gets hidden when the game gets rendered. Some things that you may not want on is vignetting. So you can type in vignetting and you can change the intensity of that to 0, so you can see now the outside is the same brightness as the inside. If we have, we can turn off motion blur. That's on by default. We can set that to 0. We can also, if we wanted to fix the brightness of this camera, we could set it the min and max to the same, maybe 3 or 2 maybe. Give it a little, there we go. That way it doesn't have sort of exposure, auto exposure turned on. So that we could also look at sometimes film grain. Doesn't look like there's any on here by default, but that might be something you may or may not want. And then okay, so now that we've got the camera kind of set here and dialed in, there's all sorts of other things you can change for your camera if you want. You can have it sort of mimic a real camera. You may want to uncheck this constraint aspect ratio. That helps it kind of match if you're doing a different resolution or something. So, all right, so now we've got our camera where we want it. Let's start making a little sequence. Let's go to add level sequence. And I'm just going to call this maybe a lawnmower as my level sequence. I'm going to go to track, actor to sequence. I'm going to type in Cine. Then we've got our Cine camera actor. And with it selected here, we can just click S, and it should generate our first keyframe if we want. And we could even start rendering if we wanted, just this right here. But I'm going to move my camera and do a little bit of a lawnmower. So I have it only doing 150 frames. I'm just going to leave it there by default to the 150 frames, and we're going to split it up to do a little bit of a split collect here. So at, let's see, frame 45, I'm going to move the red marker over here to where we want our next keyframe to be at, to frame 45. I'm going to move our camera to this next marker here, and I'm going to click S. And you can see there's a new keyframe here. And then I'm going to move our camera again. Let's go to frame 90. I'm going to move our camera up here. And then I'm going to capture another keyframe. And I'm going to go over here and move to frame 149 or frame 150 and move the camera one more time. Then I'm going to click S, and now you can see it's actually mapped out. It might be hard to see on the video a little bit. It's actually mapped out the little track that the camera is going to follow here. If we wanted to change the pose of the camera, we could just click E and have it pan, a different way or whatever. I'm just keeping it nadir here for this collection, but you could do that and it would interpolate in between. So, okay, so we've got our 4 keyframes, our little mini lawnmower collection going nadir here, and we've got our markers in place, so everything's looking good for doing a little basic collection. Let's click render and move this to custom render pass. Then in our render passes, let's first render the final image, which is just going to be our final RGB image kind of processed through the camera. That's kind of like what that preview is showing you a little bit. Let's get some depth so we can get to a scene depth. Scene depth is just going to be basically like a scaled world depth, so that everything kind of relatively close to us gets rendered in a value between 0 and 255. You can get world depth if you want to do, if you capture an HDR, you can click that and it'll export to a different format, which you can use like a Pixar, I think, editor to open for depth if you wanted to really look at that. And there's sort of different tools for editing. They're kind of stored as floats there. So, and then we're going to add our custom stencil. This is going to give us our object labels, and we'll talk about that here in just a second. But actually, so let's talk about that right now. So this custom stencil, what's going to happen, or what are all these render passes? So if we go down here into our content browser and we go into visible and we say show engine content, we make sure this is checked, then we can go into our engine content now, and we can go into buffer visualizations, and we can actually see what's going on here. So I'm going to actually enable this because this is actually going to be what you guys are going to probably see because I've already changed something here. So, all right, so if we have this here, and I click render, I go capture movie. Actually, I'm going to go down a couple more settings here for you guys. First of all, the resolution. You can change the resolution. I'm going to put it at 1080p here. You can enable all kinds of other things. I'm going to also turn on override existing. That way I don't have to keep deleting files or whatever. I can just look at what's the newest thing. Another thing is the engine sometimes takes a little while to warm up. A couple frames. I'm going to put in 3. You can do 1 is usually good enough. It's just when the camera first moves into place, some of these objects and things take a second to render. You've probably seen this in a video game when it takes a second to pop in. So that kind of all streams in, and you might just want it to warm up first. Okay, so then we're going to hit capture here. It's going to save the map, and it's going to hopefully start doing our little render here. There we go. Do our little collection. All right. Looks good. So let's open our capture folder, and I'm going to scroll down first to the color images. Just take a look at those. They look pretty good. Pretty happy with those. Pretty decent renders. Looks, I would say relatively photorealistic for what we got in just the less than sort of 15 minutes or so here. If I pull up the object labels here, this is from the Stencil Buffer, you'll see we do have the object labels, but we've also got these sort of 103s in here. You may be wondering what that's about. This is just by sort of default. The Stencil Buffer has that in. I'll show you how to turn them off in just a second. And then if we scroll down here to the bottom, we've got depth. So this is going to give us basically our depth. Now this is clipped a little bit. We can edit this if you want to adjust the values, but you're seeing sort of the tips of the things of the plants being really close to us, and the sort of edges of the cylinders here, the tops of the cylinders turning white, and then further away is black. So you can get basically a 3D map almost of your scene there really easily. Okay, so then I'm going to real quick go into the Stencil Buffer just a little bit and show you guys a little bit of stuff about that, and then wrap it up. So if we go into the custom Stencil Buffer here, we've got all this stuff here that is sort of here by default. This is junk. Don't look at this. This is extra stuff we've put in. I'll talk about that later. We've got this chunk that basically up here is computing that text value, that 103, that stencil value into text, and then like basically putting it all over the image. It's a lot of fancy work that we're just going to skip because we just really want the value out in data almost. So if we skip that, then we can go ahead and click render again. If I open up my capture folder, you're going to see that took that text right off. So we can see our cylinders move, our cylinders sort of labeled automatically, our marker objects. Now, I will go into one last thing here, which is that with their stencil objects, I'm going to sort of demonstrate a problem or a little bit of an issue that you may have or something that you may counter when you're doing this. So I'm going to start with a cylinder here, or a sphere rather, and I am going to adjust its size. So let's make it pretty big here, maybe 3, big enough to include the camera's view of this stencil ID, or this cylinder here. So let's get it close to where we're kind of in the way a little bit. All right, and I'm going to give it just a different color just so we can have a different color to look at. Okay, now from the camera's point of view, let's have it occluding about half of it there. There we go. Okay. So now if we go and render this scene as is, we're going to go through and let's just pull up this very first image here, image 0. And let's pull up the object label for that. Aha. So if you don't want this, where basically the object is being included here, but we're getting the label for the unoccluded object basically over the entire thing. So if you want per pixel labels, only what is basically the camera or the sort of object would see, then what you can do is you can go in and you can edit this custom stencil again. And I'm not going to go super into depth here, but basically you can create this little custom shader where you have the custom stencil, which is basically just the stencil value that sort of this whole stuff is feeding off of. You can split out and just get the red channel if you want, and scale it between 0 and 1, and then you can take only the depth values of where basically there's a stencil ID and subtract out the scene depth from that, take the absolute value of that, invert it, multiply it by sort of that first chunk that I was talking about, and then if we throw that all together, then we get a new stencil buffer that will hopefully take into account occlusion. So I'm going to rerun this one last time. Okay, so let's open the capture folder. And now if you look at it, not only do we have the occlusion taken care of, but now I'm going to pull up the color image that goes along with it here. So now if we also look at the value in this image, if I go to edit and pull it up with good old paint, and we select the dropper here, we can select the actual gray value here, or the value here, click edit color, and you can see it's exactly at 103 that we set originally. So, okay, so that's how to do basically a super simple data collection, little lawnmower agriculture collection. Like I said, this sort of pack is pretty cool. It's pretty high fidelity. You can actually get way up close to these little plants and see, all the little bits and stuff. So, and they kind of move around and everything. So, if you wanted to do, like, there's probably tons and tons of different questions that you can do. Now you have the metadata, everything perfectly stored out, everything that you could possibly want. If you want more more control over the camera and objects and everything, I recommend checking out AirSim. Drew's tutorial is on that. Otherwise, thank you for listening, and I hope you learned something. Good luck with all of your projects.